What is the freakiest/creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? I had a roommate who was always a complete jerk, never was polite or kind to anyone. One night after I helped his drunk butt to bed, he turned to me and said, "I really appreciate you, and I know you don't like seeing me like this. You've been a good roommate and friend. Thank you." I found him dead the next morning due to an undiagnosed heart condition that alcohol had amplified. Not creepy or freaky in the normal sense, but I will never forget how serious and genuine he was in his last words spoken ever. It was the first time I had ever heard him compliment anyone. This just seems like further proof that people know when they're about to die. In some subconscious level, their bodies know that they're giving out. That's pretty creepy. I agree with you, OP. Story 2. For 2 years, I had a roommate who was on meds for psychosis. It was me, him, and another guy. He was fine, but a little weird. Me and the other dude made sure to always include him in stuff because we didn't want him to feel isolated and possibly worsen his mental state. He never blew up or anything like that, just a quiet and awkward guy. He was not a drinker. The three of us would go to the pub, but he never had more than one beer. He would spend his night stoically listening to our nonsense, sometimes chiming in. But this night was a little different. That day, he seemed really chipper, much happier than ever before, not manic or anything, just positive and energetic. When I came home from work, he was chatting with the other roommate and was cracking jokes. We go out to the pub and I get uneasy because he downs his first beer and asks for another. The very first time he has more than one. After he finished his second beer, I took the roommate aside and we decided to keep an eye on it. He was having a blast. We didn't want to ruin his fun. He was having more fun than we have ever seen, and it looked like his whole mindset was turning in a positive direction. Eventually, we were all 8 pints in. Now, this was irresponsible of us. We had never seen him drunk before and had no way of knowing how he handled alcohol. Surprisingly, he was fine. He hit on a few girls and got some interest in return. We had never even seen him talk to a girl before. When he came back, we just had to ask him, "Why are you so happy today?" He said he got some good news. His father had passed away. We put it together that he didn't have the best relationship with his dad. He went into all the abuse he experienced growing up, and how he would watch his dad beat his mom and little sister, powerless to stop him. Or he would get tied up in the freezing garage for entire nights as punishment for tiny infractions, just awful stuff. We did a cheers to this, because it looks like he was starting to find meaning in life after his abuser was gone. One morning, 2 days later, he was arrested. That day he was so happy, he drove back 2 hours to his hometown and bashed his dad's head in. The worst part is, everyone came out to say on Facebook that the abuse never happened, including his mom and sister, because he was apparently saying those things to the police. The story made some waves in our state as well, with the court concluding that the abuse probably didn't happen. Story 3. In 1991, I went to a 7-Eleven by myself when we were at my grandmother's house. There was another kid there about my age. We looked similar, etc. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house, and that was that. The other kid was kidnapped and murdered pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some sort of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it but couldn't prove it, and to this day it still weirds me out. I'm 41 now and live in that neighborhood. Story 4. I was about 10 and I had a huge fear of someone being in my house, to the point where I wouldn't go to the basement because it scared me. But I'm glad I had that fear, because one day during the summer I was trying to go to sleep, and I heard a noise from above me and I freaked out. I then noticed over the coming days that my room was really hot, and I thought this was strange because we just got new air vents put in. My dad was checking them out and went to get some sort of tool, when I saw the scariest image possible. There was a skinny man looking at me and my dad from the vent in my ceiling. I froze and pretended not to notice him, and I went to get my dad. And me in my 10-year-old mind was instantly thinking to run with him out of the house. But I have 2 cats and was scared to leave them. So I grabbed a paper towel and a pen and wrote in my chicken scratch handwriting, "There is a man in my vent." But he couldn't read it and asked what it meant. And that's when we heard a thud, and he looked at it again and he must have put it together, because he grabbed me and called the police, and when my mom got home she got to see the man being dragged out of the house in cuffs. Even though he was caught and I still had a somewhat happy ending, the image of looking up and seeing his face and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream still haunts me. Story 5. I've told this story before, but it is by far the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. When I was 16, I had just gotten my license, as well as my first after-school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent parking lot and take a nap. This was a shopping strip with a grocery store, restaurants, and a bank on fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I'm sitting there drifting off, I see a black Denali pull up behind me, blocking my car in the spot. A gentleman jumps out in a business suit and asks if I can help him. He looks nice enough, and I'm assuming he is looking for directions. He starts to explain to me that his wife and him were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us today, so that they can purchase a boat, but she's stuck in a meeting and can't make it. He then asks if I wouldn't mind posing as her and signing the documents for her. I'm completely blown away but super shy and feel the need to let him down easy. Stupid, I know. So I tell him I don't think they'll believe I'm your wife. He then tells me it's fine, he has her license with him, which he shows me, and she has the same hair/eye color as me, so they won't know. At this point, I'm freaking out. I start to notice how disheveled he looks. He's sweating and, surprise, surprise, no wedding ring. I just want him away from my car, so I start telling him I can't help him, and that he needs to go ask someone else. He says, "It's fine, it'll be quick. Just jump in my truck and I'll take you over there." Like I said, this bank was in the same shopping strip. There would be no need to drive to it. Even in my gullible teenage mind, I know this story is complete BS. I'm telling him no over and over, while scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be noticing, but of course, no one has. He then starts getting irate, telling me I'm perfect and the only one who can do it, how beautiful I am, can he at least take me to dinner, and so on. I start trying to close my window and he reaches through, grabs my shoulder and starts trying the door handle, which was luckily locked. I'm so frozen I don't even really react. I can't go anywhere as he's blocking me in. Suddenly, and I'm not really sure why, I just blurt out that I'm only 16. And for some reason, that freaks him out. He slowly backs away, gets in his truck, and leaves. I called the police afterwards, but they never followed up. But I just know that he had found that license and made up that story as a way to lure women into his truck. And it scared the hell out of me that he could have convinced someone before. Years later, I spotted him on the offender registry for assault. Watching crime shows and stuff, especially stuff like Criminal Minds, they talk about preferential offenders, like they have a clear preference. And I can't help but wonder if this guy with that license was something that he crafted as opposed to just stumbled upon. Although it's kind of weird that he approached OP in the car without being able to see her first, presumably, and then still somehow knew the hair and eye color. I don't know, that seems weird. Creepy for sure, though. Story 6. My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but I still don't know how or why. We are 6 years apart, but went to the same high school at different times. Small school, graduating classes about 60. Years later, we're on a road trip together several states away and decide to stop at a Huddle House for coffee. We walk in and the guy at the next table turns around and smiles. He says, "You went to Anytown High School, right?" When we say yes, he says he and his girlfriend, also at the table, smiling and not talking, went there too. We didn't recognize them, but smiled politely. Commented it was a small world. He starts to rapidly talk about different things from the school, just disjointed comments that were a bit odd. He talked like a salesman almost. At first, we smile and nod, but he had weird facts wrong. So we ask what year he graduated. He claimed to not remember. So we asked follow-up questions and he gets cagey. Suddenly the girlfriend goes, "This isn't working." And they suddenly pay and leave, food untouched. We have since determined they didn't go to our school and have tried to figure out how he knew what he did. To no avail, though. Story 6. When I was about 5, I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mom, dad, and sister. We were walking towards the city center, so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand and then feeling him grab back hold of it for a few moments later. I kept walking, I don't know how far. I hear my dad shouting from behind me and grabbing my other arm. I hear him say, "Sorry," and I look up and I realize I was holding hands with an old man that I didn't know. My dad assumed that I'd accidentally grabbed onto this man's hand thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away all embarrassed. And I was just thinking, but the man grabbed my hand. So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed onto his hand. My parents were normally quite paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted when talking to my grandma. Story 8. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment with a den. In the den, we had a spare bed for visitors or whatever. One night, my boyfriend was super sick, so I went and slept in the spare bed. In the middle of the night, I had what seemed to be sleep paralysis, where I couldn't move but was seemingly awake. In that state, I saw a dark figure walk into the room and just stand over me for a while. Like, the dark figure was right over my face. The next day, I was very freaked out. I told my boyfriend and he asked if I was joking. The same night, he saw a dark shadowy figure in our bedroom pacing in front of the bed. He said he slept with the light on all night, which explained why it was on the next morning when I went into the room. This happened about a year ago and we haven't talked about it since. We would rather forget that entire night happened. For what it's worth, OP, it was probably some sort of weird hallucination, probably sleep paralysis, and then your boyfriend also happened to have something similar at the same time. Dark, shadowy figure is not exactly super descriptive, so it's a pretty common thing for people to see. And also, people don't tend to break in and just pace in front of beds and just look at people. That being said, I'm not trying to discount anyone being spooked here. I would be freaked out of my freaking mind. I think if sleep paralysis were common for me, I would just never sleep again, which I'm sure would definitely help with things. Story 9. I was probably 9 years old and about 95. At that time, all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day, I was riding on my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green two-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid, we lost our dog. Can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off. And I thought for a split second that this was it. I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline shot through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10 times louder and see everything 10 times better. I've never felt like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking, and tears were pouring down my face even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy. Story 10. I was home alone laying down on my living room floor, and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house, not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone and I ask her if she's alright. She responds that she is and tells me to hold on for a minute while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I hear a lot of noise and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before Mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her, before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and the front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been dead center. We always joke that we're psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we've had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. Now, I love to rationalize and explain things away, but this is kind of just too cool to do that with. OP, in some strange way, may have saved a life, and that is just crazy to think about. Story 11. I was very close to my grandfather. He was easily the best person in my life. He was an amazing man and went out of his way to be supportive and connected. He wrote me letters all the time. We stayed at their house often. He encouraged my education and would send workbooks, novels, etc. for me. He had worked in education until he retired, a school district superintendent, and really believed in the importance of early childhood education and reading. He was very involved in my education and a very positive man. He died when I was 14 and I was devastated. It really changed a lot in my family dynamics. He had always been the head of the family. My dad, his son, was an alcoholic. I struggled with depression. It was a really hard time for me, and I missed him greatly. I still do. When I was 25, my first child was born. We named her Raven, not a super common name here, Canadian. When she was about 4 or 5, I was browsing through the discarded books at our local library, and came across a book about a raven who thought she had ugly feathers and wanted beautiful feathers like all the other birds. The moral of the book being that we all have our own traits and abilities that make us special, and that through accepting ourselves and our own individuality, we will have a much better time in life than if we try to be something we aren't. I thought it was a touching book and really seemed perfect for my daughter Raven, so I brought it and took it home. When I went to read it to her later on in the day, I opened the front cover and saw a sort of sticker/plaque on the inside cover. It said that this book had been donated to the city's library system among several others in my grandfather's name when he died. I dropped the book in shock and a chill ran up my spine. But there it was. His name, his date of death, a blurb about how important children's education had always been to him and how he believed our children are the future. He had left a sum of money in his will to our city's public library system to use to purchase books for the children's sections. I called my mom and told her about this. She was stunned. She knew that this had been a part of his will, but that was it. So I just happened to pick up a book at my local library out of quite a few, it's a big city, about a raven, my daughter's name, who learned to love herself for who she was, which has always been my grandfather's message to me, that had been donated by my grandfather's estate to the library system 15 years prior, on the day that it was put out for sale as a used, discarded book. and then I bought it and did not find the plaque inside until I went to read it at home. It felt like a gift from him to me and my child. I can't even fathom the odds of it happening. I've never been a believer of the supernatural, and I don't believe my grandfather's ghost somehow arranged this, but it does seem to be a stretch to call it a coincidence. I like to believe that his spirit still somehow checks in on me, and my kids. I don't know how else to explain this. It still sends a chill up my spine. At the same time, I felt such a sense of love and comfort. I've missed my grandfather for many years now. My daughter is 14, the age I was when he died. She's long grown out of reading that story, but I keep it close all the same. Story 12. When I was 14, I had just moved to another state. My bedroom was sparse. I didn't even have a bed frame, just a mattress on the floor. Next to my bed was an alarm clock that had big, large red numbers on it. I laid down on my bed, put my head on my pillow, and looked toward my clock. The time was 10:24. I blinked. Literally blinked. The clock said 10:24, but it was morning. Light was coming through the window. I swear I didn't sleep. I literally blinked and it was 12 hours later at the exact same time. I spent the rest of the day in a tired haze like I'd stayed up all night. All I know is I had just gone to bed and blinked, and now it was morning. Every time I hear those conspiracy theory shows on the radio about time skips and wormholes and things, I always wonder if that's what happened to me. But it is by far the freakiest thing to happen to me. The whole blink and wake up thing is really cool. I've had it happen to me exactly once in my life. I can't say it was also exactly 12 hours though. OP must have been crazy tired. It is a little interesting to think that, a conspiracy theory like a time skip or something, I'm not sold, but it's cool. Story 13. This literally happened Friday night. My son is about 10 months old and absolutely hates sleep. He will sleep in his crib until about 3 or 4 a.m. and then wake up screaming for a bottle, then spend the rest of the night in our bed. Friday night he woke up screaming and I got up and went to the kitchen to make him a bottle. I turned towards the nightlight in the kitchen so I could pour the water to the right level when I heard a woman humming in a soothing way behind me. It wasn't like a quick thing either. It was a full 10 seconds. My son started screaming even harder as soon as the humming stopped. I dropped the bottle and booked it to our baby's room to check him and our room to make sure it wasn't my wife. He was fine and she was dead asleep with the door still closed like I left it. I had to wake her up. He has no toys that make the humming sound. I still have no idea what the hell it was. The freakiest part was how hard he screamed when it stopped. Story 14. 2 friends and I got bored one summer night and decided to drive up into the mountain to a spot that overlooks the town. It's a rough dirt road, and we were in a Volkswagen Rabbit. We finally make it to the little clearing on the side of the road and pull over. There are no houses on this road for miles, and we didn't see any other vehicles the rest of the night. So we get out of the car. It's pitch black except for the lights of the little town at the bottom of the clearing miles away. We're all kind of just chatting as we get out and something gets our attention. We all turn and look at the same time and see this thing running through the woods about 30 feet from us. Now, this thing looked like a person except it was glowing. Remember those glow-in-the-dark stars you could stick to your ceiling? It glowed at about that intensity. So we watched this thing run, pushing branches out of its way and whatnot. We all get back in the car without saying a word and drive off in total silence. About 30 seconds later, someone finally says, "What the hell did we just see?" The best answer we could come up with, as crazy as it sounds, was that we saw a ghost. All three agreed we saw the exact same thing. So a couple years go by, and I'm with the older brother of one of my best friends, and we're just talking. I bring this story up expecting him to laugh at me, and he gets a shocked look on his face and asks if I'm serious. Apparently, his teacher in high school had told him that he saw the exact same thing run across that road in front of him one night. Made me feel a little less crazy. Story 15. We moved into a new place, built around 1930, and sometime in the 70s had a fire. My 3-year-old at the time started running around the house and playing hide and seek with himself. Kids weren't allowed in our room, but our room was on the first floor, and the closet was actually the underside of the stairs. He kept running in there and shouting, "Found you, hide better." We didn't think much of it. New house, kids have imaginary friends. Until that night, he asked if Sam could sleep in his room. He said she was lonely, but they're friends now so she can sleep with him. She doesn't want to sleep in the closet anymore. No one else ever saw her and weird things rarely happened. We moved a year later, and except for the day after we moved, he asked if she can come too. He has never spoken of her again. While I think for the most part this thread was filled with a ton of freaky, creepy, and cool things, this one kind of feels like a bit of a letdown to end on, to be honest. Like, it really just sounds like a kid with an imaginary friend. I don't know, there's no like tangible evidence like some of the other stories here. I feel like as a kid, I definitely said something like that too. Alas, I'm out of time for recording. So all I can say is I hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.